of explanation and to confirm the impression that at 40, resigned, he still has a big political future before him. Sunday was also an important day in Germany. It was the day when all Germany stopped, looked, and listened. Wherever Germans were gathered together, the radio was turned on, and there was silence for the Führer's words.
No, it's an imaginally mediated, collaborative, distributed intelligence of some kind, right?
I mean, and that's what collective intelligence does, right? When John talks about the Mars rover, there's scientists and engineers and pilots, and they break apart the roles and responsibilities and differentiate, and then use their imagination and their technical expertise and their social capacity to do something none of them could do on their own. How's it going?
Hey, Robert, good to see you.
It's great to see you as well. I was wondering if you were going to have some egregore themed outfit or anything today. So
all the threads in this shirt are conspiring against me.
Oh no, they have a collective dysfunctional intelligence, and it's just aching to clothe you in the wrong way. Yeah. How's you're in California?
I'm in British Columbia.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And what are you what's pulling you there, I guess?
I'm visiting my father.
Oh, that's great. You're not even like doing something, and you're just enjoying your life and being a normal person.
It's it's nice, but at the same time, it's another, away from my house again.
Uh-huh.
But it's a nice little break. I've got to go down to a conference in a couple of weeks, so this is my rejuvenation trip.
Oh, cool. And do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, my father lives with my younger brother, but he's in South Asia with his daughter. So
okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so I'm getting the sense that you're close to your family.
It varies.
Yeah, fair enough.
We can go like years without communicating with each other.
Uh-huh.
But then at the same time, there's a lot of love and intellectual resonance and things like that. A lot of shared experience.
Okay. So like the rest of your family also loves ideas and culture and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, each in their own way, but they're all colorful, interesting, evolving people.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's great to have a family that you can kind of connect with. As an adopted person, I like notice those things, and yeah, it's interesting to just and a lot of people don't have that. That's just nice to hear that you have that.
Yeah, it pains me thinking about how little of it there is out there, and so many of the things that I deal with people thinking are amazing. For me, that was sort of normal background experience.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to realize that it's abnormal for them.
That's kind of what you want, right? You want life to just not be complicated and something that requires a lot of attention. And yeah, I was the same way. Like I have just the most loving grandparents and the most loving uncles and my mom and all those things. I don't have any brothers or sisters, but tons of cousins, and there's not like anger between us. They're not as intellectual as it sounds like your family is, but yeah, the warm-heartedness, and then you go, oh yeah, that's not normal in some ways, in a lot of ways. Yeah. So do you yeah, what do you do for fun there, or what's like a way that you enjoy your time with your dad?
Well, we've just been chatting and taking hikes and driving around. They're on the backside of a mountain here on this little island, so there's a lot of lovely nature to explore.
Oh, cool. Yeah, in Portland and Seattle and Washington, there's lots of islands. Is that kind of the same, just a little more north?
Yeah, very much so. We can almost see Vancouver from here, so lots of little islands in the way. Also, that's where we grew up, was on a little island further up the coast, so it has a kind of ancestral feeling to it for me.
I love that. I have students, not to get too much into their lives, just out of respect, but that had like family land on some of the islands up there. And I love it because it's so near these big cities, right? Like you said, you could see Vancouver, but it's got to be like a small town vibe.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they tend to be really well kept. Like there's a nice decorum of decency or something like that on most of the islands that I've been on or looked into in that area.
I've been mostly an island guy for most of my life in various parts of the world. There's a certain, I mean, they have that observational distance to the rest of the society, and they are tend to be aware that they're living somewhere lovely, and so they're motivated to upkeep it. And you get an interesting mix of like wealthy, hippie, and rural all together, and they all sort of embrace a responsibility for the land to some degree.
Yeah, all of those groups appreciate Earth, I would say. Not wealthy implicitly, but like the kind of wealthy people that are attracted to having island land.
They want it to look nice and be, cosmopolitanly pleasurable.
Yeah, Florida's an island culture, but like we're more of a culture that could throw people in volcanoes. Like we have that wild island spirit a lot of times. But the same kind of vibe, because we are kind of a fringe place, and what the country does, we don't necessarily do the same way. And I've always liked that about living here. Have you ever been to, because I know you're not too far from there, have you ever been to Mackinac Island? It's one of my favorite islands.
I don't think so. It's hard to always remember when you're a kid and you travel around, you don't track all the names.
Sure.
I don't think I've been there.
It's a great place for a conference or a retreat, because they don't allow, it's like an 8-mile diameter island. It's not very big. So it's like it's totally walkable, and they don't allow cars except for a couple police cars and an emergency vehicle. So it's like time slows way down, and they have a lot of really good fudge shops and a few other neat restaurants. And it's kind of historic. They have this giant hotel that has been in a bunch of like 1930s movies, and it's one of my favorite islands. And it's actually probably less than a day's drive from where you live. So
nice.
Yeah. So what else is going on in your life? How have you been since it's been about 3 weeks since I saw you?
Yeah, good. I mean, I was finished up my parallax course. I've been down to Toronto to hang out with the Integral Life Review people a few times. I led the Metamodern Spirituality Retreat Part 2 in Vermont, and now I'm here.
Oh, just all of those things, yeah.
Just all those things since you saw the last, yeah.
Yeah, nothing complex or nuanced or abnormal about any of those things. Yeah. How was your course? I know you seemed like to be thinking about it a lot the last time we were talking.
It was really well. I mean, it moved very quickly into a lot of resonant depth.
You were saying that.
Yeah, almost to the point where in the last session, I sort of trusted the group enough to go completely off script, which to me meant, well, this is really working well. I said, it's our last session. Why don't we sit quietly for a couple of minutes? Everybody close their eyes. And I'm going to sit until I feel that it's time to stop. So it was 45 minutes. And so you're like, an unexpected 45-minute sit. There's a lot of people who can't handle that, but this group was fantastic.
Oh, nice.
We talked through and sort of assimilated and went over how the course had been so far for everybody, and really rich and spontaneous. Some people had written these poems, and everybody else felt like they'd written that poem. And
yeah. Oh, wow, beautiful. Yeah.
The word interdividual came up for me because I've been trying to do, network non-duality and the notion of the dividual rather than the individual. And in that last session, I just came out of my head, interdividual, like combines both of those in a way. It has the interbeing flavor. Wrote a Substack article about it last week.
Oh, cool.
One or two other people have used the term, but I like it better than dividual, which is a bit clunky.
It does feel awkward. It sounds like your education system failed a little bit when you start using. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a individual, and I gotta pay my rent, and the president's not good. He's a bum or whatever. Yeah. But intra, I like the word intra just in general. Inter and intra are both really cool.
And infra is good too.
Infra.
Yeah, like infrared, it's like a liminal quality. It's right at the edge of what's perceivable. I don't know what an infra-dividual would be like, but I'm curious.
Yeah, they're hard to spot. They're like, I don't know.
I thought I saw one for a second, but
yeah, they phase in, and then a moment later they're just gone. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. And what is Toronto Liminal Web Meetup? What does that mean?
There's a variety of overlapping groups there. I'm trying to get all of them a little bit involved in this possibility of doing the next Emerge event in Toronto next summer. But also there's a little pod of people with the Integral Leadership Review crew. So there used to be this Integral magazine called Integral Review run by Russ Volkman. He died and passed it on to his apprentice, Eric Reynolds. And it had a lot of diverse sort of leading edge leadership thinkers in it. But they've taken a year or two off from publishing it, and they're going to reboot it. But right now their idea, and they have a little bit of money to throw around.
Cool.
They're trying to get relational webs of the people they trust most in the field and sort of support them and encourage shadow work and resourcing and try to coordinate as like a small pod of people operating in the larger conversation. So I'm in that cluster now and trying to encourage that, because I think they're right that largely relationship and shadow work and resourcing is one of the things that's been keeping the discourse from becoming instantiated as a real tribe that makes an effect on civilization.
Yeah, how to get into those depths without like schmucking it up. I think it's the shadow. It's like trendy. You don't want trendy shadow work or something like that. Like it's that's awesome though. But yeah, when done right, I think you're right. Like it's yeah, that's awesome. And then your in-person retreat, is that with Greg and Brendan or?
Yeah. I just came back from that and got to spend 4 days at home before I came out here. That went really well as well. Yeah, we had Greg, Tom Murray, Zach Stein, a couple of big names, and a bunch of people just coming into the conversation. That was great as well. It was themed around goodness. So we were engaged in a shared. So first there was like a longer piece. So the pre-retreat was whoever wanted to come early and work the land.
I saw that.
Yeah. And we built up some like a pilgrimage trail that we were going to collaboratively instantiate a sacred procession.
Oh, wow.
And then when everybody else got there, it became a collaborative contemplation of goodness in a meta-modern sense, as well as every other spontaneous bit of conversation and fun that was going on. So that went really well.
Awesome. Yeah, both are so powerful about those places, like the place that affords both goal moving towards good things and also just all that spontaneity and relational stuff. And it's almost like initiatory, that aspect of it in some ways.
You getting the balance right is what I'm seeing is crucial in those spaces. And when I get really strong, good feedback from people who've come, that's the part they seem most enthusiastic about, right? Because some people are, if there were no talks and practices, people would be disappointed. But if the talks and practices actually went the way it was scheduled, that would be too much for them. So very often I'm like, okay, there's a talk schedule right now. We're not going to do it because it looks to me like the conversations are going great right now, or we need to be outside or something like that. So I'm adjusting it as we go, trying to get the right balance of like conscious and unconscious and collective and individual and academic and embodied and scheduled and spontaneous. And you got to keep adjusting it as you go to get the flavor right.
I remember you, like, I think Brendan was saying like it was his first time like co-leading the last one, or one of his first times, maybe is more accurate. But do you just kind of do it enough and try to have those goals explicitly and then just get better at it, or is there like a secret sauce that you're aware of?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's there. I have some ideas and I have my own background of experience, but mostly I want to come in with beginner's mind each time and be adaptable and put myself on the spot to have to make those decisions in the moment, and then regroup or reconsolidate the insights after the fact, what worked, what didn't work. I don't want to force it on the front end. I want to gather it on the back end. And because I think that whether it's just abstract or not, and this will pertain to our discussion on egregores, we have to at least leave open the space that the field is going to educate us as we go. So part of it is our responsibility to show up with that attitude and be ready to adaptively tweak things as we go. And then after the fact go, oh, what did it show us that it wants more of next time?
Yeah, I think that resonates. That makes a lot of sense to me, because I did a lot of onboarding and having like a nice plan, but then kind of letting it go, and then paying attention a lot and letting everyone have a voice and trying to let all the voices happen created enough energy that you don't need a lot of top down if you're doing that kind of like outward. And I think as a kind of I don't know if the word practice is right, or orientation, or what word is right, but like, yeah, feeling into the field and acknowledging that, you know, if you're 11 years old, that your 11 last years of experience are not what you need to just force into that day or whatever. It's that day's day to be that day. And yeah, there's like a real beauty, and when you could find that balance between letting the moment live and also bringing something to it. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm starting to see little ways to negotiate between those. So like if I'm thinking, okay, networks and communities, then overlapping networks and communities, and then they're getting together in field production, then the fields have to be instantiated somehow. So that's what I'm seeing the need is, from field to tribe, something like that. But it's uncertain how much you take the patterns of the archaic human tribes and how much it's going to be something completely novel. So we have to play with some of the structural protocols of the ancient tribes, but not get too locked into that. So we're going to do a ritual, but we're not going to get too into our ritual. And one of the things I did was we want to see subgroups within the community, because that's how they anciently did it, right? So I took one of my talk sessions and I said, I want to hear, let's get the 3 oldest people up on stage and we'll hear from them and we'll all ask them questions. We did that for 20 minutes and I thanked them, and I let's get all the women up on stage. And now they're the speaker, and then let's get all the youngest guys up there and they'll tell us how they're seeing it. Like that kind of just playing with the edges of tribal structure patterns without getting too into it, but letting the negotiating between the collective feeling and what structure might look like in an organic, emergent fashion.
Yeah, no, I love the play that you're exhibiting, because in org psych, those are like distractors to big organizational goals like gender, race, age. They tend to actually create more fault lines, is the way the language of the literature. But in these kind of embodied like seeking spiritual value sense, they're actually kind of meaningful. And especially like elders are like kind of a valued ancient class of people, but so are the young, and so are the male and the female. So yeah, the play of that can be really healthy.
If you have an established structure, like if you had a corporate structure,
right,
there's something that is in jeopardy if emergent structure comes online. So you're like, on the one hand, yes, there's a lot of unnecessary fissioning of identity around these inherited groupings. On the other hand, if you have a high incentive to keep a particular profitable structure in place, you don't want it spontaneously organizing itself. So you would want to treat those as threats to the operation that you've got set up.
Well, and they're kind of meaningless, or they become meaningful in bad ways in a lot of group dynamics based on the literature, because our expertise, our role, our goals, like those things, if you lose track of them because you go, oh, this guy is so Polynesian and Polynesian people trigger me, you're like losing the fact that he's self-selected into your organization and probably has a ton in common with you, or he or she or whatever. But I love like the circling weekends and the kind of group things I've done. Older people's perspectives, women's perspectives, noticeably younger people's perspectives, all of those, and other things like, oh yeah, maybe I don't see these people in my day-to-day, these types of perspectives, and they can be really profound and deep and interesting.
There's a couple of danger spots. Like, first of all, is you want to, if you're looking for something like we're doing, like turquoise community or whatever anybody wants to call it, you're gonna get a high grade of people coming in already, right? So you're trying, a lot of it's based on vetting them so that the edge cases or the internal divisions aren't going to be problematic, because you already have a lot of trust in the adaptive integrity and comprehensiveness of these people. Then at the same time, whoever's facilitating has to be able to move people in and out of those identity spaces. So you can go in, but the idea is you're going to come back out. It's permeable. We don't want you to start just identifying with that. Then the third thing is the superficiality, right? That if you get into just that simplistic level of like Polynesians trigger me. I mean, yes, there's a collective intelligence there, but it's very low grade collective intelligence, right? If you were going to get into the depth of inter-ethnic relations, that would be one thing. If you're going to be stuck at the level of the conversational superficiality of the society around gender and race, then you're going to go nowhere.
Yeah, cognitive flexibility lately has seemed really valuable as like the spirit of coordination tries to supersede the like the chaos and disorganizedness. But you don't want, like we've said a couple of times already, like too much structure. Too much structure is horrible for the individuals maybe, but yeah, there's something cool about being able to let go of your own perspective maybe a little more easily, and then going like, oh, okay, yeah, cool, let me, like we were kind of saying about making space for space, the capacity just to kind of keep opening up without losing your integrity, I guess, would be the other like extreme that you don't want to do if you're too open, because you want to be able to participate without smothering or something.
Yeah, you got to get that. I mean, this is like the classic, there's several classic Ken Wilber things about this, right? If you want autonomy and community and have to migrate together, that's the design target. If one of them goes up without the other one, then that's the wrong approach.
Yeah, it's really, and it's a beautiful, like it honors the system's view of people in groups, right? Individuals in groups, because there's got to be heterogeneity in any organized system that isn't like super simple. And the heterogeneity is vital. Like you don't want no livers and all stomachs.
Yeah.
But you also don't want like the stomach to be more important than the brain or whatever. So you have to find both, like honor the differences while also, like you said, honoring the whole. That is bringing us all up into this new realm through our synergies.
The balance thing and the organic hierarchy thing are important pieces.
Yeah,
like I don't know how versed in Wilber's theory you are, but one of the interesting components of it is he treats developmental space differently than physical space. So if something's physically larger, that doesn't mean it's the next level, right? So
that's an important point. Yeah,
a group is physically bigger than an individual, but that doesn't mean it's the next level beyond the individual. So he puts it to the side, right? Because of the 4 quadrants. So every individual, like the biosphere is the social component or the social dimension of an individual cell or an individual organ. Humanity isn't bigger than a human. It's the social dimension of a human. So it goes up like that. So then you stop worrying just about, does the individual surrender to this big thing, or does it reasonably disassociate itself from that big thing? You're like, well, that's not really the question. You've always got a social dimension. The question is the one you're looking at lower, at the same level, or higher than the individual consciousness that you are right now? Because if you go, like if you have let's say an educated, seemingly rational citizen of a modern society, for them, a mob is a lower level collective, right? And it causes them to do things that are lower than their level of consciousness. But there's other groups that might meet them perfectly, and there's other groups that might be more intelligent than they are, that they should be surrendering to. So it brings the vertical in.
The transjectiveness of people and also the Janus-facedness of people, I think both of those are really subtle. And even how easy it is for us to confuse quantity and quality, because I don't know, I think it was like Robin Hood Men in Tights, and they send their scout out to see how many bad guys are out. He sees like 80 people, and then he goes back and it's like a lot, and they're like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, I don't know, 5. And so there's this confusion between language and quality and quantity. And if you do that, if you say, oh, big means important or small means important, if you do either, it's you lose that dance, and you lose, like, you need to value both, which is much more cognitively challenging, I think.
Yeah.
But worth the effort, like meaningfully worth the challenge, because then you can say, oh, that quiet person's really valuable, or our big goals maybe need to be rethought, or vice versa. Sometimes go, oh, get rid of that quiet person. This is the talking big goal needs to supersede, but it's dynamic, and it's not, you need to discover it or notice it. You can't just assume, like you said, big is good, small is bad, or whatever. Yeah. And I think we have that in us, right? Like, I think just animals probably think that way too. Like, it's a good starting place of like, oh, big cat worse than medium-sized cat, and 10 cats worse than one cat. So like, size really matters in the animal world.
It has a certain adaptive heuristic value. The other organisms, but with the kind of stuff we're dealing with, it becomes very problematic if you're not making finer distinctions and thinking about what kinds of correlates need to move forward together.
Right, because again, like, there's heterogeneity in the system, and our salience is so sensitive. We carry all this baggage. We use these heuristics unconsciously. Yeah, I think that is kind of like, I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, do you think that spawns off egregores when individuals and groups confuse quality and quantity?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you take the egregore hypothesis, right, then you have multiple options. And I think this gets to one of the ambiguities when people discuss it, because sometimes it seems like they're talking about this amazing thing that we could create that's better than us. It has a certain quality of experience that we should be attuned to and in service of. But then other times it sounds like they're talking about demons that are trying to tear us apart for some reason, which would make sense if it was a collective operating at a scale below where your consciousness is. So then it wouldn't matter how much quantity there was. If the quality was lower than the quality you currently have, then that's relatively destructive.
Yeah. Yeah, the relative nature of an egregore to the people engaging with the egregore is kind of, it seems relevant. It seems really, because otherwise it'd be a really simple problem. If it wasn't subtle and there weren't, like, maybe it's working for some people but not others, and things like that. So maybe let's just unpack what is an egregore. What are some, how can you tell there's an egregore, or what precedes an egregore? Like, what is?
Yeah, it's a really tricky conversation, because the ontological status of these things is extremely dubious, right? You never know whether you're talking about just a functional abstraction or whether it's some kind of real entity or quasi-entity is being invoked. And then, do you count a we space as an egregore? Do you count an ideology as an egregore? So, like, what's the general class of things we're talking about? Like interpersonal pseudo entities. Okay. So when is an interpersonal pseudo entity active, and what would you look for, and how would that look under different lensing conditions? Like, if the subjective detection would be different than the objective detection. I think one of some of the most important things would be what we were just talking about, what Wilbur would call a pre-trans thing, right? Like, is it a higher or a lower entity? Because if it's a higher entity, then presumably you're being opened up to it. So you would expect the people to be displaying signs of pleasing, spontaneous organization that keeps surprising them in how coherent it is. Right? Maybe with more of their capacities are being integrated, their integrity is being asked for, so they feel solid and lit up. You would see these signs in the individuals. But then on the other hand, that kind of demonic possession of a group experience, which is, it might seem exciting at first, but over time, a certain dullness would seem to come over these people, like you see under fascist or pseudo-fascist hierarchical arrangements, that the people are starting to be checked out, be indifferent to things, right? Their intelligence is not being called for. It's not being attuned into this entity. So whatever the collective event is that they all are doing, none of them takes responsibility for. They're not sure why the outcomes are going this way, which is a good sign that something like an egregore is active. But if very little of them is being involved, if only partial and primitive systems in them are being activated, then you'd see signs in their being of a very low grade participation that we should be alert for.
Yeah, I was thinking very similar things because you're framing it in a kind of agency way, where if it's extending agency or uniting agency in a way that's beneficial, or if it like has some of those qualities that suck everyone in and think, oh, this is gonna be great, but then like you said, it actually people can't orient as well, they can't sense make as well, they might not be as relevant to the whole as they thought they would be. Then it's so agency is really at the center of egregores. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. And like we were saying, a few minutes ago, if you imagine that autonomy and communion are coupled, right? So they're coupled at various levels. So there isn't a level of communion where you sacrifice your agency. That's not how it works, right? There's a level of agency and communion, and then there's other levels of agency and communion. So if the type of communion is calling your agency down, that's a good sign the egregore is operating at a level lower than the one you're currently at. But if it's calling your agency up and you find yourself as a more autonomous, more integrity full agent, that's a good sign that the egregore is something above you that you could adapt to, that you could move up to that level of simultaneous agency and communion if you participated with it.
No, I think that's great because it fits like a lot of different levels. Like biologically, a single cell has like 6 behaviors and can move within like a 4-inch cube or something, but then they start to network and differentiate and specialize and help each other out, and then they can become human beings and fly off to Mars or whatever.
Right. Or conversely, they can be degraded, right? You could go down when a body decomposes. You say a lot of the cells are actually ceasing to function as cells, and they're going to a level of collective agency, but a collective agency that's closer to mineral life than it is to organic life, let's say.
Yeah, that's interesting because like in theory, all these things are possible, but a lot of times you don't know what you're joining until you join it. And it's like a one-way causal chain. Sometimes it's hard to like get out of the egregore once you attach yourself to it, because you used to make your own milk and honey, then you joined this commune, and then they started hating milk and honey, and now you have no time to make your own milk and honey anymore. So you've joined up to a thing, and actually it too late realized like, oh, this sucks now. I'd rather be an amoeba in that pond.
There's so many aspects to that. Like one is, right, could we make a list of things that you would look for that would be warning signs or inviting signs? Or is there just an implicit learning that's based on moving in and out of these spaces and building up a certain intelligence about it, that we need to get people to do more of that safely? What are the incentive structures within these things? How much of your resources do they use up? Like you were saying, to the point where you don't have time anymore to do the functions you were doing outside of the egregore. A huge number of aspects.
Yeah, I think the resources part might be a good indicator as well, because like a hyper agent being would need a metabolism, and the parts, the individuals or the small groups of whatever that are joining together, there's a resource element that you could probably track. And I mean, even like cults, you say like, oh, Lindsay is spending way too much time with all those kids in trench coats. Like you can see the resources being reallocated. Like I don't know, what is it, electric cars, like Tesla's had like a rough quarter, but GM and Ford are actually doing better. So like this early changer forced a ripple through the market, and now the ripple is changing resources all over the place. So there's this whole resource allocation that might be a cue that like a new egregore is afoot.
Yeah, absolutely, because they would definitely be reshuffling the percentages of the flows of various resources, including information and cognition that are at play.
Especially, I mean, like in people, especially how you in teams and organizations, you can measure like transactive memory or attrition. Like companies lose so much information in attrition, or gain if they're smart, that they can capture that. So yeah, the whole information structure is itself really, I mean, and that's what collective intelligence does, right? When John talks about the Mars rover, there's scientists and engineers and pilots, and they break apart the roles and responsibilities and differentiate, and then use their imagination and their technical expertise and their social capacity to do something none of them could do on their own, or would take some ridiculous amount of genius and time on their own, I guess, at the very, very least.
No, it's an imaginally mediated, collaborative, distributed intelligence of some kind, right? Then you ask questions like, well, is it healthy? Is it a healthy or unhealthy one of those? And then that's partly, well, is it meeting the challenges we're expecting it to meet? It's partly that relative vertical assessment we were talking about. Like, is it operating at a lower horizontal or higher level than the individuals? Is it helping those individuals who are of its parts? Because you'd think if it was healthy, then it would have capacity for qualitative growth, which means it would want its parts to be better parts as well, right? So are the people becoming wiser, stronger, more adaptable, more resourced, having a higher quality of experience or not? And that one can be a little bit tricky, because maybe you need an egregore to go to war, and it's going to seem like a quality of life setback for people who initially join the army, although they may increase in their experience and capacity through being in the right kind of army. And then you've got other problems like, I might call it the Scientology problem. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but
they started in Clearwater. I could go to their Mecca 5 minutes from now. We could have the rest of this conversation in front of their headquarters. Yeah, I know them. Yeah.
Well, there's actually, when you get in like the foyer to Scientology is the Dianetics stuff. And it's not bad, right?
No.
It's useful. The first couple of rounds make you a better, more clear, less reactive person.
Yeah, you're less lonely. You often have access to more resources because they'll give you shelter, money, jobs,
they remind you of your values, and they have a definite practice for helping you decouple from identification with your half-aware traumas and reaction patterns. That's all really good.
Yeah.
But that's the sugar to lure you in, because if you keep going, they just keep taking your resources and selling you nonsense. And so now your information and your time and everything are being used up. So in the first step, your resourcing goes up. It's like your agency has been increased by the egregore. But at the second step, your agency begins to be diminished. So it's kind of a trap, the way a spider would set a trap or something.
Well, right. And I think of like the occult in Hitler's sense. You mentioned the fascists. And I mean, Hitler was taking symbols that brought a lot of meaning to like eons of people's lives, and taking kind of a culture that was on its back and wanted someone to come, like a messiah that could have done really cool, good things, and then got them all sucked in, got them feeling good, and their kids were educated, and employment was like 1% unemployment or something. So like you said, it had all these like early positive signs, but then it was actually like an evil magic or something that was smarter than everyone was, and essentially did, like you said, demonic things. And we think of the devil as a bad, painful guy, but he can be very alluring, right? Like he's the sexiest angel in some way, right?
Well, that first moment when you jettison something you've been holding as an individual in favor of the collective, that's extremely liberating, right? It frees up your resources. But that's often, I always make this joke about Reagan's America, because they were like, he was going to provide light and heat to the country by lighting the house on fire. But at the beginning, you do get more light and heat. It's just that afterwards, you're like, holy shit, didn't we used to have a house? Where did that go?
Yeah, the capacity to, we want this, right? We're naturally drawn to being connected. We realize almost unconsciously that if we can connect to things bigger than ourselves, we get a lot of benefits. And we see that in like all species, and insects and in mammals and birds and stuff. But if you connect yourself to the wrong thing, I think that's a good sign, right? Like, and oh yeah, like catharsis is also very like attractive, right? We all like love to go to a concert and have its presence heal us or make us feel free and fun and all those things. But then if you go to the wrong concerts or too many concerts, now you're actually depleted, and the cathartic thing becomes anti-cathartic, if that's a word.
You get into an addiction trap. You get to, reciprocal narrowing and all that
Right.
stuff starts to go on. And then you're like, well, how do we prep that, right? Because if we want to be more than animals, or however we want to phrase this, we want to be able to qualitatively vet our participation in egregore-like phenomenon. So part of that is, well, like a kid, he might need to get injured, he might need to have some risky experiences. So we might need to develop a way to encourage safe exposure to various good phenomenon, even if they're not good groups. On the other hand, we do need to get much better at openly sharing information about what would be a sign that it's a bad group or a good group.
Yeah, the second is, I think, really reasonable, and of course, like if you, and this is true even for our relationship, if you find out I'm in a cult, let me know. So if if you're hanging out with John, he's like, okay, I gotta kill 3 goats today before we start, like, let me know he's doing that, because I would love that knowledge. But the other thing you're saying too is, I think, really interesting, because like if I do a lot of imaginal work and it's super intense, it almost like squeezes the sponge and lets the water out so that I can have better attention outwardly. And so something about like military training of like, here's the tear gas, like we're going to put you in the room safely with the tear gas, and then you'll have like a participatory experience of a bad egregore, rather than find out the hard way, just like luck into them or things like that. So have you seen like practice groups that can do that well? Like almost, what would that look like to have the
I don't see many of them. It's probably more common in places like intelligence services, where people are trained to infiltrate, right? They're trained to go in, but still keep themselves partly out and learn how a group functions.
Well, you're like an infiltrator. You can make fake Twitter accounts that are like, I heart Joe Biden, and then make another fake account like MAGA 2024, and infiltrate these collective intelligences that are at whatever they are.
I think we see a little bit of it in certain aspects of avant-garde counterculture over the years. You see a little bit of it in some of the occult communities. You see a little bit of it around, that sort of Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary. Let's make adaptive moves with our neurological identities. Let's figure out how the systems of power are actually functioning. But for the most part, people either don't feel safe enough to try it or let others try it. They don't trust they have the wherewithal to get out if they go in, or they're too anxious to keep one egregore intact and not let people touch another one, right? So yes, there's worry that there's cults out there, but a lot of the worry about cults is from clans or states or corporations that don't want to lose their people to another egregore, right? So a lot of concern. There's a lot of unnecessarily generated anxiety about doing this practice, because you want to keep your people locked into your egregore, which you claim is no egregore at all.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's so interesting, because there's something, and you can see this again in the organizational science literature really clearly, like there's a way that ethical norms, cultural norms, the way the system is configured, that kind of stuff, that it becomes self-perpetuating, right? No one alive participated in the Civil War or the War of Independence, or did Canada have a war? Did they just like shake hands and leave things friendly?
We actually attacked the United States in 1812, but that was kind of the last one.
so yeah, but there's no, like, it's not like any of us remembers the joining the egregores that we're in.
Exactly. And
we're in them.
The intergenerational trauma aspect of it is interesting, right? So when you're identified with the persona, then you're not noticing the shadow. And so you've got this shadow vulnerability, and that can be parasitized by audience capture. It can be parasitized by marketers. It can also be parasitized by, what were we just talking about? Oh yeah, right. It can be, these things can get in through the embodied trauma that you didn't even experience. This is, I think, of great concern. Like, say your grandmother was in the Auschwitz, right? These things happen to her, and she bears the psychological, neurological, and even physiological patterns of that in her body. She raises her kids, they raise their kids. They didn't go through Auschwitz, but they mimicked her patterning. So they have the form of a trauma they didn't experience. They are to some degree prey to the same forces that can go in through that kind of shadow hole, even though it didn't happen to them, and it can go on generationally.
Right, because that's perfect, because I think that's exactly right. There's I love this experiment. They take 5 primates, I forget, they're chimps or whatever they are, and they put them in a cage, and there's steps and like bananas or something great at the top of steps. And every time a monkey goes up it, they spray him with a hose, and eventually all the monkeys will just stop any one that tries to go towards it. And they learn, like, hey, let's stop people from trying to get that. And then they pull one out. And so there's 4 that saw that happen and learned it naturally. And the new one, it'll try to go up and they'll all stop it. And then it'll learn, like, oh, stop a monkey that tries to go up the thing. And then they'll pull the second one out and the third one. So they'll have 5 monkeys that never saw the original event, but they will all not try to go up the stairs and socially reinforce. Like, if one of them does, they mimic what the ones that learned it was bad. Yeah, and it's such a
effect is now what the learning consists of, right? They're
right. So their norm is actually superseding experience in some way.
That's a huge problem. I mean, this is one of the things Bonnie and I talked about relative to what's symbolic or not, because the superseding of actual experience by socialized abstractions is a big part of the problem here. And I don't remember if she and I talked about, did I mention cuirasses and granfalloons on that thing?
Oh, I don't think so. I think I would have remembered that. I'm not explicitly, I can neither affirm nor deny, but I don't think so.
They're terms from a Kurt Vonnegut novel called Cat's Cradle, which it features a prophet named Bakonin. And he uses these terms where a cuirass is a group of people you're functionally networked with, and you collectively perform some project in life, whether you know about these other people in this project or not. It's a functional network. And a granfalloon is every kind of official, nominal, but non-functional, unreal network, right? So he's like families, nations, religions, ethnicities, clubs, all these things are just nominal. They're not real groups. They're just labeled as a group. Right? So having that idea in mind is interesting, because if you're trying to, let's say, do a zoology of interpersonal entities, you have to start to have some kind of theory about what counts as one or not. Right? Same as with organisms, right? There's a difference between a badger and a bunch of badger parts in a bag, right? And you could say, well, I've categorized it and it consists of badger parts. You're like, yeah, but it's not a badger. Right? So just because there's a bunch of people and they have a name like Americans or IBM, that doesn't mean they are a group. It might just be a nominal label on some kind of structure, but it doesn't mean that it consists of an actual group in the sense that one would be an actual organism or not.
Yeah, because I could see why that would make sense, and it would help you eliminate non-egregores by having that distinction.
Yeah, and I think that's what Bonnie's trying to do to some degree, right? She's concerned about the disempowering effect. Treating aggregate epiphenomenon as if they are the active entities, right? And so that's a concern. She maybe goes overboard a little bit, because there may be actual hyperagents that are different than these socially symbolized aggregate epiphenomenon that we pretend are in charge and disempower ourselves relative to. So
it reminds me, go ahead, sorry. No, I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
We just should be able to make that distinction. We should have in mind that we're trying to tease those categories apart.
Yeah, because I remember being a teenager, and you would see your parents say something as important, or some adult would say, oh, watch out for those thugs on the beach. And then you've been to the beach 100 times in the last year and you know there's 0 thugs, but they're carrying this specter of a force in their mind and using it to like plan with, essentially, to like coordinate action with. And yeah, it is disempowering when you're worried about imaginary thugs or something like that. Or like we give the government too much agency most of the time, and we think they're super powerful and they can do all these things, and they're actually just like a small group of incompetent people with like some historically associated power.
Even the way people say it, right? The government.
Right. That's what I mean.
Entity.
Right. It's like they're like you. Like, you know, they're me. I couldn't do well if someone said, "Oh, there's nukes being launched on the other side of Asia." I'd go, "Oh no, tell the people things are fine and that we have a plan." And I'm gonna go cry in the corner because I picked the wrong career path or whatever. Yeah, because we the attribution and misattribution of agency is, yeah, you're right. It's like it's a waste of energy for people that are trying to deal with unhealthy egregores or find good egregores to participate in.
That image of you in the government crying in the corner is, I think, important because I think it's healthy and normal for us to have some kind of distance between our sense of identity and the roles we're playing. And that's a way of participating in egregore in a more simultaneously agentic and communal fashion.
Right.
When you see somebody lose that, when the government official starts to really think they have all this power, or when your persona gets audience captured or something like that. So now you have no wiggle room, you have no exchange. And so what's happening there, one idea is it's actually gone down to a lower level of yourself, right? So it's lower than where your consciousness is. It's just locked in at a partial identity level.
Well, that's wise. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because the persona, I've learned a lot in the last year, is such a especially in the modern world. It might have been actually really adaptive in smaller groups, but like in the modern world, if you get locked into your persona and like loyalties to things, because especially with the way media works, you can put out this massive signal, and if you start to buy into it, or people start to buy into it, that's when the agency gets hijacked and the flexibility gets lost. And audience capture.
It's a good sign that the egregore you're working with is lower than the level of your consciousness.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because and it's losing touch with the world. That's, I think, like a healthy egregore has external feedback loops, and these persona captured ones don't. They think that that's why Jonathan Peugeot called them demonic in those kind of cases, because they have that sinful pride that they're amazing and they're blinded by it, right? So
I would call that regressive, right? Because it's operating at a lower level. It's falling down. You don't have, there's no psychic space around that, right? There's no, what I think I called it wiggle room a minute ago.
There's
no negotiation between you. You're like, here's my persona, or here's the role I'm playing, right? You've kind of collapsed down to a lower functional level that's smaller than you could be. You're now inside it, and so you've got no space to reflect on it. And so even if you had feedback from outside, which you don't always, so a healthy egregore will be able to receive critical information from outside the egregore. But even if that was coming in, if you no longer have any distance between yourself and the persona, you're being operated at a lower level, and there's no place to receive that incoming information. Now you're just fully locked in. And there are signs. You mentioned loyalty. So loyalty has its place, but when people start to propose loyalty as a superior value,
right,
it's a very bad sign. It's just like when they start to propose purity as a scheme. Right? This is one of the things you'd see in a fascist system, is instead of the egregore believing it's healthy enough to integrate other things, it is actually signaling that it's unhealthy and weak because it can't hold any diversity. It's got to just purify, like reduce the heterogeneity, reduce everything down to a simpler level at which we might be able to manage it. So it's saying, I have no confidence in my ability to assimilate new information and differences. And so that's a worrying sign that would indicate a potentially regressive or demonic egregore.
Yeah, like the Scientologists do that quite a bit. Like they hate outside perspectives and try to keep people away from them. It's like, oh, don't go there's nothing at that window. Don't go near the window. And it's easy to, like, from hindsight or from like this view we have, like oh, it's reciprocal narrowing. But like when you're within it, what are some signs do you think that people could have to say, oh, I'm at the stoa too much, or oh, I'm at whatever too much?
Well, I mean, one of those things is like, what are you hearing from the other people who are in the same situation? And if they're giving the regressive idealizations, that's a bad sign.
Mm-hmm.
But also, how are you feeling? Do you have some kind of space between yourself and the role you're playing there?
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling that your opportunities are opening, right? Are you feeling enlivened? Are you feeling curious? Are you feeling spontaneously impressed by surprises in the field? Or are you feeling more and more solid, more and more desperate, more and more urgency in the egregore, right? That's a real bad sign. If you're just feeling stressed all the time about securing the egregore, it's a good sign the egregore is fragile and probably regressive.
Yeah, so having like practices and like already having capacity or keeping your capacity to have that kind of self-awareness and that social awareness helps you get, because I think like Bonita is a great example. She even said, like, I don't really get sucked into egregores, and it's like, well, of course you are very thoughtful and spend all your time worrying about this stuff and have a lifetime of experience kind of helping people and keeping yourself out of these traps. So like that's kind of the inoculation. And John and Jonathan Peugeot and Jordan Hall were saying, like virtue is the kind of anti-egregore. And in fact, like if you are in like an egregore you can't leave, or that you want to try and change, trying to build your own virtue or like a virtue that would counteract that, it's like feeble as it probably is. Like being the virtuous Scientologist within Scientology is like a Promethean reality.
But it's a good place to start.
But yeah, it has potential.
Getting wanting to get outside perspectives is a good place to start. Like we were saying,
yeah,
having a history. I mean, the best thing is have a history of moving in and out of these things, so you're more confident with them. But a lot of it, the persona rejects the shadow, and the shadow makes you vulnerable to lower grade egregores, is probably how I would say it.
That's well said. Yeah.
In large part, the shadow is a rejection of certain sets of sensations that your organism doesn't want, right? So the feeling of the hassle or danger of the outside perspective, or the feeling of, I can't even consider what it would be like to leave the group, something like that. You go, well, what if you did? You're like, well, it would feel like this. It would feel upsetting. I would get seemingly negative affects, at least initially. So that's a lot of the way that the shadow is locked in, is the refusal to undergo those troubling sensations and emotions. So being willing and having hopefully some people socially who can encourage you to go, it's okay to feel those things. Like, what would it feel like? I'm not saying leave the group, but if you did, what would that feel like? What would it feel like if you received a critical perspective about the group and just sat with that?
Yeah, so that is like a norm a group could instantiate on purpose, or could encourage in people. Say, no, take a vacation, try, leave us or something like that. Like we're cool with that.
Right? The Amish send their kids out for a while and then say, come back if you want to. And
none of them come back.
Oh, some of them.
A few, yeah. I think they're having a real problem with attrition though. That norm.
Yeah.
People are going like, Amish. I want to be all that fun stuff over in the outside. But yeah, I think that's kind of a cool, encouraging people to like be okay with membership leaving. And
did you read my Substack article on ambidextrous egregores?
No, I will. You have to send me that. I don't think I've ever heard of it. Yeah.
So it's a thing. It actually came up at the Respond thing, because Rafe Kelly and Steve March and I did a group discussion, and we ended up talking about egregores and the utility of the demon phrasing and how you would actually help people to get ready to not get so sucked into mass formations and things.
Cool.
We generally agreed with each other. The only place was a bit of contention was between Rafe and I, when I proposed that egregores could be ambidextrous. and he thought of them as competing predators, which is a reasonable interpretation. But I think we should also have on the table the fact that these things might have two hands, and where you see two groups fractioning against each other, they could be the same group, right? That even very simple organisms have a left and a right side. And if you were a conspiracy, whether consciously or like socio-organically emergent, why wouldn't you use oppositional processing to control people?
Mamushka! Mamushka! He comes with Mamushka!